We are discussing Plato's ideas on what constitutes reality. What is reality? And if that is reality, what are the political implications? What are the political implications? Plato explains reality in terms of a cave. But before discussing the example of cave, we will discuss what we are familiar with, that is how blind people describe an elephant. These are the blind people, and each blind man touches part of the elephant. He touches tail and says it is a rope, and somebody says it is a fan. It's a snake. It's a spear. It's a wall. Okay. Each blind man is seeing a part of the elephant, a part. And then from the part, he extrapolates the whole without seeing that he has access only to a part. Okay. But somebody who is not blind can look at the whole thing and then say, it is an elephant. Okay. And can this man who has seen the elephant explain to these blind people what is elephant? In the first place, to a blind person, one cannot communicate the experience of vision. So, if a person with vision says, this is beautiful, the blind man may say, you mean tasty? Okay. So he can't understand what is visually beautiful. Okay. So, how a person who has a superior knowledge will convey to the people who do not have that knowledge? That is one issue. Or how does a person who knows the truth convey to the people who do not know, who may not have, who don't have a ability to find out what this person is talking? So blind people's description of elephant gives the problems related to how to convey truth. That is one. By the one who knows to those who do not know. How do you convey the truth? There is a clear barrier, insurmountable barrier for these people to know what the elephant is. Okay. So, blind people's perception of elephant may be our perception of the world. That's one way of looking at this example. So, what is reality? How do we know? Do we have all the faculties to know the truth, to know the reality? Is one issue. Next, let us look at political implications. If they are put to vote, all the blind people will have one idea, but the one who knows the truth will not share, will have a different idea. So it means many people have partial or wrong opinions, but the one who knows the truth is in minority. And the minority is not in a position to communicate. And what does this mean to democracy? Which goes by opinions. So, this example has many implications to the nature of truth, to the nature of reality, and the way democracy is working. But Plato takes somewhat different example that is called Allegory of the Cave. This is a little more complicated. Plato says there are prisoners in the cave. Here are the prisoners. Prisoners are tied to the wall. They cannot move their heads sideways. They cannot walk out. What they see are shadows on the walls of the cave. Shadows. These are the shadows. Shadows of the objects here. Why are these objects casting shadows here? Because of the fire here. So, fire is casting shadows of certain real objects on the cave wall, and the prisoners can see only the shadows and not the real objects. And because they have been so all along, they don't have an idea of what is reality. They think that these shadows constitute reality. So around that, they even have games. Okay, for example, there can be competition held on the nature of shadows, and honor depends on the knowledge of the shadows. So social system, reward and punishment system also goes around knowledge of these shadows without anybody having a clue that they are only shadows. And Plato says, if one cave dweller was dragged out, he has to be dragged out and sees the reality. So he comes out and sees the fire, real objects, how they are casting shadows. And he goes out. Okay, and then here he sees the sun. and the entire landscape. He is a realized person. Okay. He was shocked by his own ignorance when he was in the cave. So he wants to help his friends. Suppose he goes back. But how would his former friends treat? Former friends would treat him as something wrong happened to him when he went out of the cave. Plato says, won't they grab hold of anyone who try to set them free and even kill him? Plato knows that the one who was actually killed in real world was Socrates, because he tried to show the nature of reality. So, in common with the example of blind men describing cave, this also shows that there is a reality. Only few can know. For others, shadows appear real, and when somebody who knows the truth tries to point out, they won't listen. May even kill. Okay. So this is, and in terms of politics, it is many versus one. One who knows the truth versus many who take shadows to be real things. Okay. But more important question is, what is Plato suggesting in this allegory of cave? So what are the shadows and what is real? And it is here, there is one very important theory that's called theory of forms. Theory of forms. Theory of forms is just like in this cave, you have real objects and shadows. Shadows and real. Real objects and their shadows. Okay. These shadows shape depend on their angle, light, and many other things. Shadows are changing in a flux, whereas real is unchanging in this allegory. Now come to theory of forms. Plato thinks there are objects in the world. Okay, this is, you can say, sensible world. the world of senses. But corresponding to these objects, there are forms. For example, rectangle is a form. Table is a sensible object, object accessible to sensible world. A table is not a perfect example of, it's not perfect rectangle. If you measure a table, it will not be a perfect rectangle. Because the perfection is there only in the form. Plato says table is a participant in the form of rectangle. So forms are ideals, abstractions, whereas these are real. This is amenable to mental constructs, idea, whereas this is in the sensory world. So those in the sensory world are changing, inaccurate, but idea is something perfect. So for everything, Plato thought there are forms, like table has rectangle. Even goods have some forms. In the end, even goodness has some form. Okay. And the philosophers are expected to know the forms. Philosopher is expected to know the form of goodness. It is not how that form of goodness is manifested in a sensible world across diverse situations. So the question is, people have asked, what are these forms? Are they really forms? Should we know these forms? Okay. So these are the questions that have been asked. So let us see more specifically how theory of forms is stated. Okay. Aristotle says in Metaphysics, the theory of forms occurred to those who enunciated because they were convinced as to the true nature of reality by the doctrine of Heraclitus, that all sensible things are always in a state of flux, so that if there is to be any knowledge or thought about anything, there must be certain other entities besides sensible ones which persist. For there can be no knowledge of that which is in flux. Okay. This is true of objects as well as moral thing, like goodness. For example, this is what Plato said about goodness. the good should be recognized as responsible for everything that is right and fine, whatever the circumstances, and that in the visible realm, it is the progenitor of light and the source of light, and in the intelligible realm, it is the source and provider of truth and knowledge. So just like sun is the source of some all visible things, form of goodness is the source of truth, knowledge, like this. So, for everything that is sensible, Plato is suggesting a form. Okay. So, how is it like? Okay. Surely, one of the earliest critics is Aristotle. Okay. Aristotle says if there are real objects, why can we be sure that there is something like a form? So, is there any? That is one. And even if there is some, should one know? And even if one knows, what is the use? So Aristotle rejects the theory of forms, finding that that is not necessary. Okay. So let us see what he has to say on this. Okay. He discusses in his book Nicomachean Ethics. Okay. This is what he has said on forms. Okay. It is hard to see how a weaver or a carpenter will be benefited in regard to his own craft by knowing this good itself, or how the man who has viewed the idea itself will be a better doctor or a general thereby. For a doctor seems not even to study health in this way, but the health of a man, perhaps rather the health of a particular man. It is individuals that he is healing. See, carpenter is making a chair in real terms. Why and how should he know form of chair? And what is this? How does it help? A doctor is healing a man, but should one know about form of health? What does this mean? After all, a carpenter has to make real chairs. A doctor has to treat a real man. What is the point in treating all of them as like shadows? And these shadows correspond to or participate in a form. I mean, what purpose does this serve? Okay. And even in goodness, Aristotle says, we are inquiring not in order to know what virtue is, but in order to become good, since otherwise our inquiry would have been of no use. So, how to be good is more important, not form of goodness. Okay. And he says, subjects like ethics and politics, same taken from Aristotle's book, are inexact. We don't need to know anything like forms. For a carpenter and a geometer, investigate the right angles in different ways. The farmer does so insofar as the right angle is useful for his work, while the latter inquires what it is or what sort of a thing it is, for he is the spectator of truth. So mathematician's right angle is not carpenter's right angle. Plato might say mathematician's right angle is the form and carpenter's right angle is a participant. But why should carpenter know anything about form of right angle? That's what Aristotle is asking. We must be content then in speaking of such subjects and with such premises to indicate the truth roughly and in outline, and speaking about things which are only for the most part of true, and with the premises of the same kind to reach conclusions that are no better. So carpenter needs to know things approximately. Not as accurately as a mathematician. A politician needs to know things approximately. Not the way a philosopher should know. So, Aristotle is concerned about practical knowledge, which is useful in the craft. Whereas Plato is concerned about ideals. Plato is about abstract knowledge. Aristotle is about empirical knowledge. So in these ways, these two are different. Okay. Now, this is about reality, nature of truth. Now, what implications does it have to political system? Okay. According to Plato, there are 5 political systems: monarchy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny. But ideal system is something different, that he calls just city. But of these 4, monarchy is better. Okay. What is the link between theory of knowledge and this ideal city? The ideal city consists of 3 classes: philosopher kings, warriors, and others. Philosopher kings know forms. They know the form of goodness. because they know the forms, they should rule. And whatever others know, they know things which are not real. They know only shadows. These people may constitute majority, but truth is here. And also implied is that the truth is one. Plato's philosopher knows the truth, knows the absolute truth. The one who came out of the cave and saw the sun, which means he knows the absolute truth, and more importantly, there is one such truth. And he is in minority. But others know only shadows, but they are in majority. Because a political system should run on the basis of truth, philosopher kings should rule. And since they know what is right, they can dictate in the interests of everybody, because only they know the truth. So, in that sense, the idea that there is one truth and philosopher kings know gives them right to frame policies, rule, even manipulate. Because when they are manipulating in the interests of the political system. It means philosopher kings are given all these powers because they know the truth. They know the forms. And that gives them legitimacy to create a system even when it is not approved by others. So all these things, this theory has implications to totalitarianism based on ideology. We are right. We can impose. Okay. Rulers know the truth. They don't mind imposing it, because after all, they're working for the welfare of the entire society. So, the legitimacy to the rule of the philosopher kings is the truth. That is nothing but the theory of forms. So that is why there are many who understood that this kind of thinking leads to totalitarianism. Okay. For example, see, look at this. Berlin. The world we encounter in ordinary experience is one in which we are faced with choices between ends equally ultimate, claims equally absolute, the realization of some of which must inevitably involve the sacrifice of others. Indeed, because this is their situation that men place such immense value upon the freedom to choose. So Berlin is saying there is no one truth. There is no one moral choice. There are many choices. There is nothing like knowing the form or coming out of the cave or knowing the full elephant. Okay. So this certainty of knowledge makes Plato's Republic, as Karl Popper called, an example of enemy of an open society. Karl Popper wrote this book, Open Society and Its Enemies. Okay. So there is a two-world view that suggests that there are absolute moral truths by which people should live. This creates opposition to open society. Okay. And because they know the truth, and philosopher kings can subordinate an individual to the state. Subordinate an individual to the state. You know, in the mate selection, they rig the lottery to ensure that mates are chosen from their genetic basis. This is what philosopher kings do, because they know the truth. Okay. So what do these philosopher kings have? They have souls with gold, and auxiliary classes have silver, and third class have bronze and iron. So those with gold souls have the right to rule. Okay. So there is one truth, and some people know it, and their souls are gold, and so they have the right to manipulate others. All these things create a totalitarian state. Stalin thought he knew the forms. Mao thought he knew the forms. That is why they didn't mind committing enormous violence. Okay. But to Plato, that was an ideal political system. Okay. These quotations are from this book, Not Republic. Because in his view, just city where philosopher kings rule is an ideal political system. But Plato's ideas on other political systems are also interesting. Next best is Timarchy, which resembles Sparta. But instead of philosopher kings, auxiliaries rule. So that is a drawback considering in comparison to just city. And also they enslave people, and slaves don't like their position. So because of which that political system does not have temperance. So after a monarchy, there is oligarchy where auxiliaries give in to their desire of wealth, and some become rich, and some in the society become paupers and even criminals. This is oligarchy. And when the poor conquer the rich, when some rich are killed or others expelled, it becomes democracy. Out of this democracy, when someone arises as a champion of people, cancels debt and redistributes land, thinks some populist schemes, starts war and purges enemies, then it leads to tyranny. Okay. So knowledge is ruling in just city, but in Timarchy only courage and honor is ruling. In oligarchy, wealth. In democracy, simply numbers. Tyranny, only one person who comes to power through variety of means. So this is the importance that Plato gave to knowledge. and the idea that truth is possible. Okay. And the problem with democracy, he says that in a democracy, if a philosopher competes, he would be at a disadvantage compared to rhetors who are able to persuade large numbers by telling them what they want to hear, who appeal to their appetites. Like a doctor competing with a confectioner for the favor of the children. When a doctor and a confectioner compete, children will prefer those who are giving sweets, whereas a doctor may want to give medicine. Okay. So, what a doctor and a confectioner to children is what a philosopher and a rhetor to democracy. These things have a lot of truth. Plato is right, after all, when he says that you can't arrive at truth through opinions. Truth is different from opinions. This is one very important issue, whether we think there is one truth or not. Then these kind of people, rhetors, they are reputed to have made their city great, but no one notices that these men from Athens past made her bloated and rotten by stuffing her with no sense of restraint or right, full of trumpery, like harbors, dockyards, fortifications, and tribute payments. So, state is given these facilities, but Plato thinks this is not right, because a political system is to make a man virtuous. The purpose of the political system is to promote virtue. All these things don't promote a virtue. Okay. So that is the thing that Plato wanted to create. Okay. Rhetors appeal to the appetites of the people, whereas philosopher king appeals to reason. Okay. So there is a lot of truth in Plato saying that democracy goes by opinions and opinion is not truth. This is one very, very, very important thing. And also, appetites are stimulated in democracy. Appetites are stimulated, like anger, hate, power. Okay, can be food. Whereas philosopher would like to promote reason, kindness, virtue. So, democracy is stimulating lower part of the soul, whereas a just system should make use of the higher part of the soul. So these are really very, very important points that modern political systems should understand. But one very serious problem is that a state does not leave an individual with some freedom. Okay. Plato doesn't have the idea of negative freedom that liberal democracies promise. Okay. So this is one very serious limitation which Locke identifies much later.